Well, hello, like minds, again. For those of you that have seen me present here before, 4 years ago, or 10 years ago, I'm sorry. It's me again. Different topic though. For those of you that I haven't met before, as we said, I'm James Poulter. Lots of people know me as JP, and CEO, co-founder now of Vixen Labs. And excited to be back in Exeter because it's the first kind of bit of business travel I think I've done in probably 2 years. You remember business travel, right? Yeah, because getting on trains, planes and automobiles to get places. My first ever bit of business travel was actually when I worked at Ogilvy about some years ago. And we had this fantastic experience. It was kind of like the relationship between the agency, which I was working for, and the client was reversed, which is usually the agency, you're the one that puts on the nice dinners and takes people out, and the client, you kind of wine and dine them. This was a complete reverse. We were working for this amazing oil firm, which is less popular these days, and they were actually the management consultants of an oil firm, which was quite an interesting dynamic. And I'd been tasked with a couple of colleagues to go and work with them over in Paris, and so they had asked us, bear in mind I'm kind of like a young 20-something account executive this time, so I was like, this is brilliant, I'm getting to go on the Eurostar. They put us in first class on the Eurostar over to Paris, put us up in a beautiful hotel at the top of the hill overlooking the city. And after the first day's work with these clients, they said to us, what's the evening entertainment going to be? And they were like, oh, Francois, who was the actual name, who was the leader of this small team, who kind of looked a merger between, I would say, like a kind of linebacker of kind of an American football team and a pit bull, with more of a French accent, about 5'4". He said in an accent that's now going to get me cancelled, "We are going on my boat." And we were like, okay, we're going on Francois' boat. And so he invited us out onto his boat, which was moored down in the Seine, literally under the watch of the Eiffel Tower. And we got on board this boat, myself, 2 colleagues, about 3 or 4 members of this managing director team, and about 3 staff, followed by these lovely little picnic boxes, little purple boxes with kind of cardboard lids. They had real salt and pepper shakers in them, full cutlery, and about 12 bottles of Chateau Patrice that kind of followed us on behind. It was lovely. And we sat down and had this meal on this boat. And then Francois says, right, we go sailing. We go, okay, we're going sailing. And so the guys that had been serving us dinner then started becoming deck hands, and so they started unlashing the boat down one side. And Francois looks up and looks around and says, "We ready to go?" "We're ready to go." Great. And we're all kind of sat down in our seats, and he throws the throttle down on this boat, and we begin to kind of cruise out into the Seine. And it was lovely and beautiful until we suddenly heard the most amazing crack and bang coming off the left-hand side. I'm not sure if that's port or starboard, someone can correct me later, which was basically like whack, 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 and there was splintering wood and metal flying everywhere. And what happened is that the deckhands had clearly unlashed us from the moor on the right-hand side of the boat, but on the left we were attached to the boat next to us still. And so all of this begins to come flying into the river. And another small French man wearing a typical little sailing cap kind of comes out of his boat screaming bloody murder at Francois. No one knew what was going on, and he's shouting and spitting. And Francois just stands up and looks around and goes, "We deal with it tomorrow." Throttle down into the river, and off we went for the evening. And the rest of us sat around looking bewildered. And the reason I tell you that story is because that phrase of "we deal with it tomorrow" is something that comes up all too often in our lives, isn't it? That you see this emerging problem swelling behind us, this revolution of some description that's happening, and it's very easy to just want to kind of hunker down, eat a little bit of a baguette and some cheese, and just kind of say, "we'll deal with it tomorrow." And that's what I want to talk to you about this morning, is that there is another revolution of technology coming at us that we cannot just do that with this time around. So this morning this talk is titled "The Power of Voice," and that's not about our voices, as Archie's just say, hopefully taking us through, but it is a little bit about innovation, as Chris has kind of started us on. How many of you have kind of lived through a technological revolution in your lives? Yeah, all of us, right? Several of them, in fact. I first started working at Ogilvy, as was mentioned, with in the social media team, when blogging was the thing. Remember blogging, Drew? Drew used to do a lot of the blogging. and the twittering, that was when you had to do it via text. And we were working with these brands, kind of sitting around going, what's all this social media stuff then? And by the time that it became a big thing that they had to deal with, it was too late. The same thing then happened with mobile phones, the same thing happened with apps and websites and everything else behind it. And so this morning I'm going to talk to you about voice technology, and that's what we do at Vixen. We do it for all of these types of people. I put these logos up here so you'd like me. Everyone has one of those slides. And we're on a mission to help brands not miss this next revolution, to try and help them understand the power of these little anthropomorphized ladies and gentlemen that live in the boxes in the corner of our homes. You might call her Alexa, Siri, Google Assistant, pick your kind of subservient person of choice. And that's what we're trying to kind of help brands not miss the opportunity on again. Because we believe that actually technology has lots to give us in the world and make the world better, but in a couple of instances recently we've kind of cocked it up, and so I want us to try and make sure we don't do that again when it comes to behaving with this next technological revolution, because I think it's fair to say that generally speaking we don't think that this is okay, right? Our level of addiction to these things, our over dependency on them, the average kind of person in the Western Hemisphere will usually not be more than 20 feet away from their mobile phone for any more than 20 minutes in a 24-hour period. That is maybe a problem. And we don't necessarily have to be addicted to these screens in as much of the way as we are at the moment. There's lots of evidence to say that we are spending more and more time with one of these little devices in our faces than we all really actually enjoy, but we can't help but do it. For example, TV time down, mobile phones up. On average, you pick up your phone 58 times per day, on average. For many of you, it's many more times than that. If we want to do a little social experiment, how many of you have got the screen time app on your phone turned on? Does anyone wish to divulge their statistics to the room publicly? No, the nervousness on your face tells me that that's why. 70% of the sessions that when we pick up our phones are less than 2 minutes. It's habits, and bad ones most of the time, that cause us to do this, right? The habit loop you're probably familiar with. If you've read the work of very many popular books recently on the power of habit, Charles Duhigg, Atomic Habits, James Clear, some of these kind of recent titles have been phenomenally successful. Well, why have they been so successful in 2020 and 2021? Because we spent a lot of time at home just doing this. Sorry, I was on mute. That's what we've gotten used to, isn't it? Just distraction, constant distraction. And I think that voice technology in particular might have some of the antidotes to that distraction. I want you to think about the best dinner party that you've ever been to. What qualities and hallmarks does it have? Well, a good dinner party usually should have a good location, start on time, a good collection of guests that create nice kind of conversation. And a good dinner party guest usually shows up with a gift, perhaps, or something nice, never arrive empty-handed, and creates conversation that you want to engage in, and crucially knows when to get out of the way. And if it's really good, you'll be invited back, right? Those are kind of good dinner parties, and hopefully you can all think of a good dinner party. I mentioned Rory Sutherland this morning. I remember one of the best dinner parties I ever went to was something that Drew arranged in a hotel in London where Rory was speaking. And another colleague handed me a gift, which was a poker chip. Do you remember who that was? Peter Shankman. Peter Shankman, who was, I think, the third most flown person on Virgin Airways or something, or Delta, third most frequent flyer, as in globally. He flew the most of that. He had business cards that were poker chips, and I remember him giving me this little gift and talking me through it. And I'll remember that evening for all those same reasons. Great conversation, great company, someone adding some value, some exchange, a little present, and we all kind of left happy and wanted to come back again years after year later, evident here. These dinner parties, I think, is what we want these experiences to feel like when we talk to brands and businesses and institutions and companies and one another. We want it to feel like a good dinner party, and I think most of the time dealing with any of these companies on these things rarely feels that way. Do you ever feel like you're getting more out of the experience than they are? Do you ever really want to come back? We're lured to come back, sure, but I mean, an addict is lured to come back to all sorts of things. Do you want to? So I want to tell you a little bit about kind of where this tech is in 2022 and what do I mean by it. I don't just mean these little smart speakers in the corner of our rooms. I mean, those are important, but actually it's everywhere, right? Voice has become something that we've begun to use pretty universally across all different sorts of technology and many different devices, from custom speakers being made by people like Alibaba in conjunction with Starbucks in that top right, through to voice-enabled tables that you can go and get with speakers built into them. It's pretty much everywhere. And we're using it multiple times a day. These stats come from a study that we conducted at Vixen last year called the Voice Consumer Index, which looked at 2,000 people in the UK, another 2,000 in Germany, another in the US, at the behavior of consumers. And we found that actually, for most people, voice is already part of their daily lives. Over half in all three markets are already using it every day. Over 30% of us are using it every single day. It's actually already with us. There are more people that have a smart speaker in their homes than own a Fitbit or an Apple Watch or anything of that nature. So this is already here and very present with us. And it's spread across all age groups. This isn't just something that young people are doing or just people with kids. In fact, actually, many people in the older age ranges that we looked at are more dependent on it than ever before, because they don't have to learn how to touch, type, or swipe. They can just speak to something, and that's something that you all know how to do and even know how to do better now, thanks to Artie this morning. So this is something that is already very present with us, and it's with all of us across some of these big technological companies that we're all familiar with and using. This stat gets me every time. How many of you own a pair of AirPods? These little white things that live in our ears. If AirPods as a separate company, as this graph shows, was broken out from Apple as an independent business, it would be bigger than Adobe or Nvidia today on the stock market, just the sale of these little things. And why are these so important? Well, yes, they get music into our ears, of course that's important, but they also have little microphones in them to listen to us talking to Siri. How many of you are convinced that at some point or other the Metaverse is going to be a thing? You're like, what's the Metaverse? Yeah, I agree. Well, whether or not augmented reality or virtual reality is going to become a thing, you are not going to be typing and swiping onto glasses that you're wearing all day. I think for those of us that wear, kind of optical enhancement, would say that that is not a particularly good way of keeping them nice and smudge-free. Right? We're going to be talking to these things, whether it's autonomous vehicles or future caring robots that help us out in our care homes, or if it's just a pair of smart glasses that help you find the nearest Burger King. Whatever they are, we're not going to be typing and swiping on them. We're going to be talking to them. And these little things are the training wheels for Apple or all of the other big tech companies' next revolution, to put technology on our wrists and future on our faces. So we have to get ready for it. In fact, we're seeing it already happen in lots of different places that you may not expect. Siri, which is for a long time has just been encapsulated in the iPhone and iOS, is beginning to be allowed to be used on other third-party devices. Facebook Poulter, which was their attempt at, Facebook's attempt, or Meta, sorry, his attempt at creating a smart speaker before the pandemic, which basically sold none, sold out within 3 months of COVID hitting us, and they're now selling more devices than ever before and creating new product lines. I mean, how many of you thought you would put a speaker and a camera from Facebook in your home? I didn't think any of them either, but they're doing it. So we're beginning to see this go further and further in new form factors. This is the new Amazon Echo 15. It's a whole, basically, Echo TV that you can put on your wall in your kitchen to become the hub of the home. We're welcoming these devices in at an alarming rate, in many senses, to all of our lives, and running lots of our day-to-day activities from them. When we looked at where people actually use their voice assistant, they use it at home on their phones more than they use it on any other device in the US. In the UK, it's a similar number. And we find that people use these smart speakers at home, but also increasingly in things like their cars. And I'm sure many of you who've bought a car recently might have voice enablement in it. So we're seeing this pretty prevalently across all different device types. And it's important because if you care about getting anyone to pay attention to you in 2022 and beyond, whether that's a business, whether it's you're an individual, whether you're a government or an educational institution trying to teach people or get people's attention or teach them hands, face, and space or whatever it might be, more likely people are going to begin to turn less and less to keywords typed into Google and more often turning to a speaker or their phone and speaking out a question. And a keyword and a question are quite different things. And we need to adapt the way in which we talk to people to get their attention if we're going to ask them to ask questions rather than get them to ask keywords. I mean, in the early days of the URL, how many of you know, we all know what a URL is, right? A web address. Training people to remember what www meant was a thing. Many of us have forgotten that now, but for those of us that were kind of creating websites in the early noughties, we'll remember that we had to tell people, no, you have to go put the full thing in because Google wasn't going to help you get around it at that time. And now we don't have to do any of that because we just tell people to say something that they already know how to say to a device that's probably within earshot. And that changes things. And so when we look at what people actually do with these things, when you strip out playing music, reminders and timers from what all of us probably use our Echoes and Alexas to do. The next biggest thing people do is ask questions to search engines. They search for products and services. They search for local business information. So if you are a hotel chain, I think there's one or two in here, or a restaurant, what happens if you go and ask Google Assistant today if I want to book a table at the Pig, or I want to go get a room at Hotel Divan? Do I get the answer from you as the website that owns that information, or do I get it from Wikipedia or Expedia or some other aggregator site? If you care about that stuff, you're not going to get 10 blue links that you can go click on a screen. Google's going to read you one answer, and that answer is the answer that we need to know how to control. So this is a kind of marketing and technology revolution that's going to affect us all, particularly if you are interested in getting people to pay attention to you. When 80% of people search for kind of information about a product, they're not going to go and say the thing that you kind of expect. They're going to ask questions. Here's an example of what's the best way to get a stain out of a shirt? And here we've got an advert and an example. But every other piece that's not the ad is going to be read out by a website. Not just your website, whatever website ranks for that. So if you've spent any time over the past couple of decades worrying about search optimization for your website, we now have another challenge in front of us. The difference here, I suppose, is that when people then search for consumer brands, do they use your fancy slogan? How many of you know the campaign from Purcell in the UK or Omo elsewhere, the Dirt is Good campaign? Does that ring a bell? You recognise it? Well, dirt is good. Have you ever turned to a speaker when you were questioning is dirt good and said dirt is good to something? No. You would say, is dirt good for my child or whatever? And you can see the differences. Dirt is good, great, Purcell, #1 result. Is dirt good, the thing that actually anyone would say? The first result is from lifeeducation.org.au, followed by NPR. If you're a big brand, or any brand, company, or organisation that cares about people remembering your thing, then maybe think less about keywords and more about questions. So this is changing the way in which people go about doing their marketing. It's changing the way in which we live our lives. And as we can see right now, when we look at how people discover new things to do with their voices on this technology, most of it comes from trial and error, which is a good thing. Consumers care and we're giving it a go. But it's not coming from advertising or from PR or marketing or social media or all the other tactics that we're all using. And if this becomes the predominant way, as it already is, that we search for information, we're going to have to change the way that we do that. So I've got a little example of something that we're doing we've been doing for the past year for McDonald's here in the UK, of building experiences so you can kind of get this kind of information. During the pandemic, it became pretty important that you would know whether or not somewhere was open. Did it do delivery? Did it do, takeaway? All those kind of questions. So we built something for them, which I'll just give you a little example of.
With the McDonald's UK skill, you can find your nearest restaurant and hear about its services, as well as how to get there. You can also find answers to common questions. And everyone loves a tasty McDonald's offer, right? So the week's top deal is played to you right at the beginning of the skill. Currently, to get the offer, you need to access it through the My McDonald's mobile app. With the Centre Phone feature, we can now make this journey effortless by deep linking straight to the deals page in the My McDonald's app. After hearing the offer through Alexa, you're asked if you'd like to have it sent to your phone, and a notification appears. It's that simple, creating a frictionless connection from voice to mobile and getting the best from both interfaces.
We're excited to see how connecting voice with Centre Phone will enhance our customers' experience.
Now, whether or not you're loving it or not, that's just an example. Sorry, couldn't help it. of these different technologies kind of coming together, right? Our voices, our mobiles, our speakers, they open up all sorts of interesting opportunities. If you're here kind of driving into Exeter and you're coming down the motorway and you're feeling hungry, we're not far away from being able to see a big banner advert over the top of the motorway that says, hey, order your next McDonald's from the next drive-thru, it'll be ready for you when you pick up. And just say that to the speaker in your car. It transforms the way in which we might be able to kind of reach people and target them and talk to them there in the moment. No tracking of whether or not they clicked a link and followed a pathway and all this kind of stuff. So the thing that I wanted to bring this morning is that we are seeing a new technology revolution. Right? The way in which we, kind of change our whole consumer behavior, our whole pattern of behavior is shifting towards using our voices because it drives empathy. We have that connection with one another. We can actually use our embodiment, kind of our lungs and vocal cords and ears and all those kind of things, rather than just being addicted to getting ever bigger thumbs. And we can actually, begin to engage with technology with more convenience and less friction. And I think that that's why we're seeing such a massive move towards this. So I present this morning as you might be like, well, what can I do about it? There's lots you can do about it, from optimizing content on your web pages for search, building simple conversational apps, which there are now many ways of doing that in the same way that you might have used something like Squarespace to build a website. You know what Squarespace is if you listen to a podcast for the past 10 years, or whatever it might be. Building these things has become ever simpler. But the big thing to watch out for is, are your customers already asking questions about you, and what are they asking? So I challenge you all to go home this evening. If you've got one of these devices in your home or in your hands now, because you've got a phone that can do this, just think about what questions someone might be asking about you or your brand, business, company, institution, and see what the answers are. You might be quite surprised. But don't bury your head in the sand or drift off into the river and worry about whether or not we'll deal with it tomorrow. You did that with other things before, didn't we? So don't do it again. If you want more information about the consumer index, you can find it at vixenlabs.co/VCI 2021. We're about to do the 2022 study as well, coming out in June. But you can download the full findings there for free, and would love your feedback on it. And thanks for the time and attention, and for the invite back, Drew. It's always a pleasure to bring something a bit different. And think about how your voices are going to change the voice of your customer. That's my challenge to you this morning. Thanks so much. I've been James Poulter. I'll see you again soon. Thanks.